The rock type is a bit of a mixed bag in competitive Pokemon. The majority of rock types are quite weak and don't function very well in battle. Rock types have an unfortunate 5 weaknesses to water, ground, fighting, grass, and steel. And these are terrible weaknesses to have. Water, ground, and fighting in particular are extremely commonly seen attacking types. However, rock types are excellent offensively. Rock hits 4 types super effectively, most notably the flying type, making it a fantastic complement to ground. Same type attack bonus on your rock type moves is extremely valuable, and some of the scariest and most dominant Pokemon in the history of these games have been rock types. Rock types also have their defensive advantages, and can work quite well when designed around their strengths. While few rock types rise to the top in competitive, it's not really the rock type's fault, and the few examples of powerful rock types have shown us that. Let's take a look at the most relevant rock types in every single generation of competitive singles. But first, thank you all for helping me achieve the milestone of 70,211 subscribers. I have converted all of these subscribers into horsepower, and it appears that the Horse Council are now a bit more open to the idea of me entering their ranks. Will I succeed? Only time will tell. Thank you. In Generation 1, the best rock type in the game is Rhydon, who is actually extremely good. It is a staple of the format, one of the best forms of counterplay against Tauros, who is the most popular Pokemon. In Generation 1, normal types are everywhere, so normal resistance granted by rock type is ever valuable. Even though Rhydon is ×4 weak to water, ×4 weak to grass, and weak to ground, just resisting normal makes up for all of that, and most normal types don't have access to those super effective attacks that threaten you. Tauros and Snorlax both have Earthquake, but you have the defense stat to shrug that off, and you scare them a lot more than they scare you. For many years, there's been a bit of a rock-type rivalry between Rhydon and Golem. They both have the exact same typing of rock-ground, but with one important difference, and that is that Golem has access to Explosion and slightly different stats. And you'd think that access to Explosion is a huge deal. This is one of the best moves in the game, allows you to trade with enemy Pokemon, probably makes you way more useful, but over time, people have actually realized that Rhydon is quite a bit better than Golem. Mostly because it has this really high HP and attack, which Golem lacks. Golem is not quite as bulky as Rhydon. Doesn't hit as hard with good old Earthquake. Rhydon's Earthquake can 2-hit KO Chansey, I believe, and hits important ranges that Golem can't hit, is more threatening to incoming switches than Golem is, and also, Rhydon has over 100 base health, so Substitute can actually live Seismic Toss or Nightshade. So this makes Rhydon a bit better. Rhydon, thanks to its ground typing, also checks Zapdos and Jolteon very well. Is immune to Electric, that's useful. But as a rock type, in Gen 1 you're having a pretty good time. Resist, the most common attacking type in the game, the most important type to resist. Rock coverage is also pretty useful, hitting flying types. As for the other rock types available, Omastar is maybe a noteworthy one. It also has that valuable normal resistance and a very high defense stat, making it an additional Tauros or Snorlax answer that has a high special stat as well and pretty hard hitting special attacking options like Hydro Pump. I think that Omastar is a bit outclassed by not only Rhydon, but also Cloyster in the role of like a Tauros Snorlax check. It gets pretty easily stopped by Chansey, which is a problem. Reasonably viable, not terrible. And rock typing in Gen 1 is very useful defensively. Kabutops is the other fossil Pokemon you can get in Gen 1. Same exact typing as Omastar, but this is a more physically oriented Pokemon, similarly defensively bulky, with a much higher attack stat. Unfortunately, Kabutops doesn't get any rock-type attacks. This is a common thing in Gen 1. The type that you are, you don't get any attacks for them. Options are very limited, but it does have access to Swords Dance, which is very scarce. Very few Pokemon get Swords Dance in Gen 1. You got like Kingler and Pinsir and such fellows as that. So Kabutops actually is not bad in the world of Swords Dance users because it has its nice normal resistance for entry points. Mixed coverage in the form of Stab Surf off the back of 70 special allows you to hit like Rhydon, actually. Rock types that come in on these normal type attacks you have here. So not terrible. A very rarely seen option, probably difficult to make it work. And the final rock type is Aerodactyl. I don't think that this one is very good yet. Aerodactyl would become a lot better later in the franchise, but in the debut game, the best thing Aerodactyl has going for it is this high speed stat, and in Gen 1 speed correlates with crit chance, so Aerodactyl has a pretty high crit chance with access to Hyper Beam too, but this is a tough Pokemon to use effectively. Doesn't fit very well in the metagame, is threatened by a lot of common Pokemon, and struggles to hit the field, struggles to do much. I think if you want to be a rock type in Gen 1, you got to be defensively oriented, taking advantage of that normal resistance as much as you can, and Aerodactyl is just a little bit too weak on the defensive side. In Generation 2, the Golem Rhydon rivalry continued, and actually Golem surpassed Rhydon. Both of these Pokemon became a bit more distinct in this generation with unique tools of their own. Golem most notably got access to Rapid Spin, which is a fantastic new form of utility and hazard removal that Rhydon didn't get. So Golem is a bit more useful defensively. It is one of the most popular rapid spinners in this format because it can switch in pretty safely against Snorlax, the most common Pokemon in the game, threaten it pretty well, roar it if they are curse boosting up, and also take advantage of its defensive switch-ins by removing hazards from the field and giving your team a bit of breathing room. Golem is also epic because in Generation 2, all of your EVs can be maxed, meaning it is not as much of a commitment to run a mixed attacking set. Therefore, you can go like Fire Blast Golem to hit enemies such as Skarmory trying to come in and be immune to ground. Golem does have access to Curse too, but if you want a cursing ground rock type, I think Rhydon is a better bet just because of its higher bulk. It's a bit more well suited to this role. That's where it has the upper hand against Golem still, but Golem overall is more useful. And of course, Gen 2 saw the release of the most iconic and successful rock type in the entire Pokemon franchise, Tyranitar. Excellent pseudo-legendary stats and a move pool that many would consider truly outstanding. Tyranitar is a rock dark type, a great offensive type combination, and in Generation 2, Tyranitar has the important role of acting as a pursuit trapper, eliminating ghost types such as Gengar and Misdreavus. On top of this, it can super effectively threaten the common Zapdos with its powerful stab rock slide, and it has all the damn coverage on Earth with such options as Thunderbolt and Surf if you like, if you're interested. The most common is Fire Blast. I think you can also do a curse set on Tyranitar. You absolutely can if you wish. Shuckle also exists. It's a rock type. I talked about this guy in my video about bugs. Bug Rock is a pretty good typing because it cancels out your weaknesses to fighting and ground. And you're also neutral to flying instead of weak to it on the bug side, so pretty good typing for such a defensively oriented Pokemon, and you apparently can use this as a PP stall guy who just sits here and is annoying. That's something. And of course, how could we talk about the rock type without the iconic Macago, one of the most epic Pokemon ever released, who does indeed have a Smogon OU set for Gen 2. Let's take a look. Wait a minute, what is this? Simply put, Macago stinks. It can tank things like Muck, but don't expect it to do much. This is all wrong. This is all wrong. This is a good Pokemon. Don't listen to stuff like this. Pathetic would be the best word to describe. No. Don't listen to all that. This is a good Pokemon. And it has the fantastic Fire Rock type, which it's got some weaknesses, but nothing noteworthy, nothing significant, you know? And Fire Stab, thank you, I'll sign me right up. I can threaten Skarmory. I can switch in on Snorlax. They don't have Earthquake. They don't. They just don't. In Generation 3, Tyranitar soared in viability from a pretty good Pokemon back in Gen 2 to the #1 Pokemon in the whole game in Generation 3, thanks to mostly one simple change, which was the addition of abilities, and this right here, Sandstream, which summons Sandstorm on the field permanently on switch in, which is the highest impact ability in the entire game. It affects everything on the field instantly with no cost. It is the crux of many strategies in this generation to punish leftovers healing and maintain a fast pace, punish a huge amount of Pokemon at once, the most defining ability in the metagame, and as a result of this ability and the fact that permanent Sandstorm is up in most games, the entire rock type has been elevated in Gen 3 because rock types are immune to Sandstorm damage, so every rock type is loving life. They can use their item freely, they're not worried about getting chipped, they're having a good time, especially Tyranitar himself. Not only does he summon Sandstorm on the field, they gave this guy Dragon Dance, which was extremely significant, turning Tyranitar into also one of the most powerful win conditions in the entire world. Rock Slide's infamous 30% flinch chance comes into play more when you can boost up your speed and the damage, and sometimes this move can make miracles happen and cheese games that were supposed to be lost thanks to hitting a lucky flinch here and there. And because of the threat of this flinch and the disruption effect, it is is imperative in Gen 3 to run sturdy rock resistances that can take Rock Slide and not mind too much if they do get flinched, like Swampert and Metagross and Jirachi, Flygon, fellas like that. This has a high impact on the metagame, and Rock type kind of warps the metagame around itself as a result. And Tyranitar, of course, has the most set variety ever, with Pursuit sets to eliminate Ghost types, mixed attacking sets, various bulky physical sets, mix and match various options to your heart's content. It is the most versatile guy in the world. It is the most central Pokemon in the format, and it's epic as well, can I add. And the second most impactful rock type on the Gen 3 metagame is Aerodactyl, who, remember this guy from Gen 1? He sucked, now he's outstanding. Aerodactyl benefited greatly from the addition of the new item Choice Band, which allows you to buff your attack stat in exchange for the drawback of only being able to select one move each time you are on the field. But that's no problem. Aerodactyl is kind of like the first really powerful speed control Pokemon, because thanks to its enormous speed stat, it can outrun pretty much everything, including a enemy Tyranitar that has Dragon Danced. Aerodactyl is probably the most commonly seen fast physical attacker in the format. It's the best at it, and it's the most effective and scary late game cleaner in the entire world. It generates momentum like nothing else, and it can even make up for the fact that your team isn't the best defensively. Aerodactyl just does so much when it hits the field and generates such pressure that you can get away with not having switch-ins to common threats when you have an Aerodactyl. Even though Tyranitar and Aerodactyl are the only two OU-ranked rock types, there are more relevant rock types in the metagame, and one of them is Regirock. Regirock is quite good. It's a mono rock type, and it does not set sand on the field, so it's obviously competing with Tyranitar. They do similar things. They're both rock type physical attackers. But Regirock has some advantages, most notably its enormous 200 base defense, allowing it to live way more hits than Tyranitar can. Tyranitar is vulnerable to stuff like Dugtrio's Earthquake, fighting type attacks, even Metagross Meteor Mash. Regirock still takes decent damage from those, but it's not gonna really fall in one hit to many of those attacks, and it has plenty of ways to clap back. Some teams also don't want to make sand necessarily. If you're running fellas like Snorlax and Suicune, they don't benefit from sand, so you're better off running a bulky rock type that doesn't set sand. It depends on the team, so Regirock is a good option in those cases. It also has the unique tool of Explosion, which is incredibly significant, and it's not too hard to find opportunities to use this, since you commonly can't one-hit Regirock, and you'll deal just shy of its full health, and then it'll explode and trade after already paralyzing a guy, maybe getting a KO here and there. So Regirock is good. It's a good lead. It has a good lead matchup. Clear Body is also a relevant thing. Can't have stats lowered, so it matches up a bit better against a Salamence, who can't intimidate you, which does come up quite a bit. Good Pokemon overall. Armaldo also exists, and has that same bug rock typing that Shuckle introduced to the world back in Gen 2. And this does feel a bit better here, the typing. It is immune to sand, crucially. Armaldo is one of the most effective checks in the game against Snorlax thanks to its normal resistance and neutrality to ground and fighting, making it not too worried about such options as Earthquake and Focus Punch from Snorlax. Armaldo is also one of the few things in the game with Knockoff, which is a fantastic option, especially in a world with Sandstorm. Removing leftovers is key. Armaldo can fit on certain defensive teams that need a Snorlax check and some item removal. Aggron is another new rock type introduced in Gen 3, and this is quite a cool one. I quite like Aggron. It has a steel rock typing, and the steel typing allows you to switch in against Skarmory and not be afraid of getting poisoned. And from there, Aggron can start to punish switch-ins with like a Focus Punch on an incoming Swampert, or you could Rock Slide the Skarmory and pressure it quite well. Skarmory is neutral to rock and is vulnerable to that flinch chance that disrupts it. So Aggron's pretty cool in that it has that common entry point against Skarmory. Can function alright because you can punish like an Aerodactyl locked into Double Edge or pivot in on Snorlax here and there. It does suck to be ×4 weak to ground and fighting. That is really bad, and that is a very exploitable weakness, especially against Dugtrio, who can trap you. I do think that you actually live a Dugtrio Earthquake from full just from your sheer defense stat. You might need a bit of investment to hit the benchmark, but it still doesn't help that you're weak to so many common attacking types. But you do have those situations where you can hit the field against those key enemies and actually get a lot of value. And you can use Aggron on like a rock spam strategy that is trying to pressure Swampert because you bait it in, punch it. Pretty easy to get avenues to start applying pressure with Aggron. Not an easy Pokemon to fit on teams, not fantastic by any means, but definitely noteworthy. Cradily also exists. It's not very good. but it does have the unique rock grass typing, which is fun. It's the only thing that gets recover, or one of the only things that is also sand immune. That's cool. It's got all right defensive stats with an okay special defense and such options as Mirror Coat to hit ice types trying to defeat you. And it also has the ability to suction cups, which means it can't be forced to switch out by Roar or Whirlwind. So you can use this as like a baton pass receiver, give it a bunch of curse boosts or something, and then Skarmory or Zapdos or Swampert or whatever can't roar you out. It's a total gimmick and it doesn't really work much of the time, but quite a distinct Pokemon with very specific tools nothing else has, and there could be something here with a Cradily team. There's potential there, I think. Lunatone and Solrock are fun. They're more rock types. Lunatone, a more specially leaning one, and noteworthy because it's actually a really nice switch into Salamence, physical Salamence, because you're immune to ground and you resist flying thanks to your rock typing, and you're sand immune. A bit of a weird way to take advantage of rock typing, the flying resistance coming in handy in Gen 3 with Salamence being a prominent threat. That's a resistance that thus far has not really come up for the rock types, but in Gen 3 that is more relevant. And it is the only Pokemon with that set of qualities that also can do Carmine to Baton Pass, and it can also click Hypnosis to put something to sleep for momentum. Its stats are horrendous, of course, but this has been used by Super Epic Ampharos in a SPL game. That was something, so there you go. Solrock, in my opinion, is the better of the two Celestial Rock, is that even what you call these guys? You know, Sun and Moon themed fellows, because it has more physical attack and such options as Explosion, Stab, Rock Slide. You can use this as a lead, actually, and you're a rock type immune to ground. That's useful against like a... It actually matches up pretty well against Salamence, Tyranitar, and Zapdos, the three most common leads in the game. And you can start things off with a bang, hit the Tyranitar with an HP Fighting. I believe the Linear Curve, the most legendary Gen 3 player of all time, has experimented with Solrock, and on a physical offense thing, like a Magneton offense, this is okay. Omastar got a bit of a buff in Gen 3 in the form of the new ability Swift Swim, which is actually one of the best offensive abilities in the entire game, granting double speed in the rain. Very powerful. In OU, Omastar is a bit outclassed by Kingdra, who's overall a bit more useful, better typing, and Water Dragon, a bit easier to make use of, a bit more versatile, but Omastar does have the benefit of resisting normal and being immune to sand, which does come in handy. It's a bit sturdier against like a Snorlax or something, which can be nice, especially on special offense teams that aren't always the best into Snorlax. And also, it has access to spikes, which is good. It's something you can click on a defensive switch to make permanent progress, using the threat of, you know, clicking Hydro Pump or Ice Beam or something to create an avenue to make spikes. I actually quite like that. And because you're Sand Immune, you can also afford to run like an offensive item like Mystic Water or Lumberry, since you don't need leftovers for chip healing as much. And Rhydon, of course, does still exist. It has fallen from OU in Gen 3 for the first time, where in Gen 1 and 2 it was OU ranked, and one of the better rock types in the game. Rock types have passed by Rhydon. It has done its time, but it's still alright in Gen 3. You can build around it on certain team archetypes. That 130 base attack is definitely nothing to sneeze at. It does have 40 base speed, so to take full advantage of Rhydon, it usually is on para-spam teams that have a lot of Thunder Wave and Body Slam Pokemon, trying to paralyze as many enemies as possible, which can allow Rhydon to actually outspeed them and threaten them, and create opportunities for it to substitute and use all of its great coverage behind the substitute. Rhydon has Ground and Rock Stab, which is amazing. Ground and Rock are an amazing coverage combo because they hit a wide array of Pokemon. And Mega Horn also actually complements Rhydon very well, allowing it to hit Celebi, who is a pretty good switch in otherwise. You can shrug off Rock Slide with a Celebi, but Mega Horn is ×4 super effective against Celebi, which is really nice. And other grass types, if they happen to have a Sceptile, they're getting smacked with Mega Horn. I think Rhydon's quite good, actually. And of course you can't talk about prominent rock types without mentioning the Magcargo moment. Magcargo is a Pokemon that has never lost a single game. It had received the ability Flame Body in Gen 3, a significant boost to its power, which actually burns the enemy Pokemon 100% of the time if you are Magcargo, which is a fantastic buff. And this propelled Magcargo to great heights. It's considered S tier by a lot of different people. Now in the Smogon tiering system, it is ranked in PU with some sort of mistake. I will speak with the higher ups about that and get that fixed, don't worry. Tyranitar was the best Pokemon in the entire game in Gen 3, so naturally in Gen 4 they decided this Pokemon needs a buff, let's make it even better. In Generation 4, Permanent Sandstorm is still as impactful as ever, but guess what? Rock types now get a 1.5 times boost to their special defense in the sand, a significant buff to all rock types once again. Not only this, the physical special split was enforced, making such options as Crunch and Pursuit now physical attacks. Tyranitar has a much higher attack than special attack, so that was also a significant buff, and now such options as Fire Punch and Ice Punch could be used physically for coverage. Tyranitar also gained access, as many rock types did, to the new option of Stealth Rock, the most powerful move in competitive singles history, a incredibly high impact entry hazard that deals damage to switch-ins based on their weakness to the rock type, completely punishing various rock weak Pokemon instantaneously for not much setup. Only a single turn and you're going to get such damage off that throughout the course of the game, it's crazy. I don't need to tell you how good Stealth Rock is. So rock types received a lot in Gen 4, that buff to Sandstorm. Most of them got access to Stealth Rock, which was the new best move in the entire game, so many rock types were happy. However, in Gen 4 they didn't make many new good rock types. The only OU ranked rock types are still Tyranitar and Aerodactyl, and compared to Gen 3 there's actually less viable fringe rock types for OU. Speaking of Aerodactyl, this Pokemon's role changed a bit in Gen 4 to be more of an aggressive lead rather than the same fast choice band attacker that it was before, with the addition of Choice Scarf to the game, which is a choice item that buffs speed. A lot of Pokemon could now fill the role Aerodactyl filled as a speed control fellow, but with more desirable options such as U-turn and important coverage to threaten Dragon Dances and other such things, like Choice Scarf Flygon became really popular in Gen 4. Aerodactyl wasn't really used as much for the speed control, but as a fast Stealth Rock setting lead with access to Taunt and the new option of Stone Edge, a new physical attacking rock type move, it definitely saw some success in that department. It's one of the most consistent leads in the game. Probably the most noteworthy new rock type in Gen 4 was Rhyperior, the new evolution for Rhydon, and it is kind of just Rhydon but better. It has a higher HP and attack and defense. Still very low stats on the special side and very low speed. This tends to be how most rock types are designed. They give them a million attack and defense and no speed and no special defense, making them pretty flawed, but Rhyperior is one of the few rock types designed this way that can overcome its flaws decently enough, and it is occasionally seen in OU. It has the ability Solid Rock, which is very good, nerfing the amount of damage you receive from super effective attacks, giving you a little bit of breathing room against all the types you're weak to. It also helps that Rhyperior is existing in a world where Jirachi reigns supreme and can spread paralysis very nicely with Body Slam. Jirachi is even better in Gen 4 than it was in Gen 3, so that Paraspam archetype is even more effective here. 140 base attack is pretty enormous. Rhyperior can wall break like almost nothing else. Probopass is less of a Pokemon introduced in Gen 4 and more of a comedic joke, but it does exist. It's Rock and Steel type with Magnet Pull. It has a funny nose. It's an evolution of Nose Pass. And its stats look really good. I mean, it's got 150 special defense. That's pretty insane. Most rock types don't have such special defense. Maybe Shuckle has it beat, but that's pretty good. It's just Rock and Steel type is not the way in such a generation. As a Magnet Pull Pokemon, they introduced Magnezone in this gen, so you're outclassed there. As like a defensive rock type, it's even worse now to be weak to fighting because so many things have close combat and more strong fighting type attacks. With physical special split, there's also just more super effective coverage to worry about for rock types across the board, so it's a bit harder to be a rock type in this world, and Rock Steel suffers quite significantly. Maybe you could use this in Gen 4, maybe someone has. I'm not familiar with any such thing happening, but it's funny, at least. It's a funny Pokemon. And Bastiodon is another Rock Steel type introduced in Gen 4. I think they tried to make it good as well with the enormous defenses, but suffers from many of the same faults that Probopass suffers from. Sturdy doesn't even function in Gen 4 in the way you think. It does not leave you on one like a Focus Sash, it just blocks one-hit KO moves such as Fissure and Sheer Cold, which is not relevant, of course, in singles where these moves are banned anyway. It has Stealth Rock Toxic, but so does the entire planet, so there's very little benefit to using Bastiodon. It is very low ranked. Rampardos, I think, is pretty funny. This guy has 165 base attack, which outdoes even many legendaries. That's higher than Zacian Crown's attack stat in Gen 9. What a world. However, it has no speed, no defenses, so not very good. But the amount of damage output you can achieve with a head smash on this fellow is pretty ridiculous, and Mold Breaker is good to ignore enemy abilities. In Gen 5, they released one of the most successful new rock types in quite a while, Terrakion. In the early metagame, Black and White 1, Terrakion was outstanding. It was one of the most threatening Pokemon you could face with its mix of high speed and attack, a fantastic offensive type profile, Justified, which actually functions pretty well on this guy, granting an attack raise if you hit by Dark type move, and pretty good coverage options too. Terrakion could be a choice band set like this, or you could use it as a Stealth Rock setting lead with Focus Sash. Quite a bit of set variety on this fella. Terrakion has fallen in viability a bit ever since Black and White 2 when Landorus Therian released. It saw a pretty significant dip. Landorus Therian obviously a fantastic check to this thing that made its life much more difficult, but still a good Pokemon, still commonly used on like hyper offense teams as a really powerful aggressive Stealth Rock setter. I think that this is a Pokemon that plays to the offensive strengths of the rock type quite well. Tyranitar is still here, of course, and it's as excellent as ever, but things have changed a bit for Tyranitar. Its tools itself haven't changed, but the metagame surrounding it has. There are now some new competition in the realm of weather setters, with Politoed having Drizzle, which permanently sets rain, Ninetales with Drought, and Abomasnow with Snow Warning. Snow Warning did exist back in Gen 4 too, but it wasn't quite as relevant as it became in Gen 5. Tyranitar doesn't as commonly use Rag and Dance sets or offensively oriented sets. It's usually mainly a weather setter that exists for the purpose of pursuit trapping important targets like Latios, Alakazam, Reuniclus, and perhaps making Stealth Rock. So it mostly feels like a weather setter and kind of a defensive check to things. In Gen 5, whereas Gen 4, it had a bit more versatility in how it was used and how it could be taken advantage of. Sand, I think, reigns supreme as the most powerful weather effect in the game. Just removing Chip Heal from everything is really powerful, and many strategies can synergize with that concept very well with the addition of like Magic Guard Pokemon like Alakazam, Reuniclus, who don't mind sand but apply a lot of pressure to enemies who hate sand. Sand teams often rise to the top of Gen 5. Even though Aerodactyl is not technically OU ranked, I think it is actually quite OU viable, and it's common on hyper offense teams in a similar vein to how it was used in Gen 4 as a Stealth Rock setting lead. Is still probably the most reliable guy to set Stealth Rock on the field early game. An interesting development is that sets started using Double Edge as a way to actually KO yourself after you've been brought down to your 1 HP with the Sash, because if you're not on the field after fainting, the enemy can't rapid spin. So if you're up against like a Starmie, for example, they Hydro Pump you first turn. As you set Stealth Rock, you can Double Edge and recoil yourself, and then Rapid Spin has to connect and hit an enemy to be able to actually remove hazards. So by KOing yourself with the recoil damage, you can play around Rapid Spin, which is fun. Aerodactyl is very good still. It does just do this one thing pretty much. The days of Aerodactyl existing as a physical threat primarily are ancient history now. And they did make some more original rock types, but none of them were very successful. Crustle exists, and it has like Shell Smash and stuff, but it doesn't have a very high attack stat, and it's difficult for it to actually threaten enough things. It doesn't compete up in OU. It's an RU ranked fellow. Having Sturdy on a Shell Smasher is good. This guy's always really good in random battles, so that's something. Same for Caracosta, who is very similar, also has Shell Smash, but is Water Rock instead. Has a bit higher attack actually. Solid Rock is something, also gets Sturdy if you want. Gets Swift Swim too. This is a pretty cool Pokemon actually, with some ability variety, but just a bit weak. Doesn't have very high stats. Gigalith is another original rock type, and this is what I'm talking about with the design of rock types. This guy is kind of just Rhydon, again, with high attack and defense and low speed and special attack and special defense, and it suffers from all the same issues that those Pokemon do. I mean, there was a time where Rhydon was a top tier Pokemon back when the games were simpler and resisting normal was a premier trait, but things have changed. New mechanics exist, more offensive options exist, a simple rock typing doesn't really thrive with a stat distribution like this any longer. Most prominent physical threats that rise up having such options as close combat, stab earthquake, even water and grass type physical attacks. This kind of Pokemon simply suffers, including Rhydon and Rhyperior, who are now significantly worse, not really seen in OU. The best rock types in OU are either fast threats that can do something immediately, like Terrakion and Aerodactyl, or Tyranitar, who has significant utility all wrapped in one, making weather for you, checking common Pokemon thanks to the pursuit trapping, psychic immunity and all that. So you need a bit more to make up for a simple rock typing. Like Gigalith feels like a Pokemon designed with an old Pokemon mindset in a new world, and thus it can't really function the same way. In Generation 6, one of the most powerful new Pokemon and new Megaforms in the entire game was Mega Diancie, the first ever rock fairy type. And this Pokemon is outstanding. When it Mega Evolves, it gains the ability Magic Bounce, which is one of the best abilities in the game, bouncing back various things to the enemy, like status ailments or hazards, granting immunity to all those things and even getting the benefit of them for yourselves. Really good ability, and most Pokemon with this ability have terrible stats, but Mega Diancie has legendary level stats here. 160 attack and special attack, high speed, good bulk, and Rock Fairy is a good typing. It has a really good offensive move pool too, with the new move Diamond Storm, an accurate rock type physical attack, which is hard to come by. Previously the best similar option was Stone Edge, and this also has a chance to raise your own defense, 50% chance on hit, gets Moonblast. You can be a mixed attacker with this guy. Earth Power for coverage, such utility as Stealth Rock. Quite the move pool. Mega Diancie is just excellent. The GOAT is back once again, folks, Tyranitar. And once again, things have changed. Sandstorm is no longer permanent. All weather is no longer permanent. Sandstream temporarily sets sand on the field, but Tyranitar's advantages are still worth something. That special defense boost for rock types in sand comes in handy, and its ability to pursuit trap various Pokemon is still very much useful. Tyranitar also received a new Mega Form, which has significantly increased stats and makes the Dragon Dance option better than it was back in Gen 5, returning Tyranitar to its former glory of a boost sweeper. It has like 160 base attack in its Mega Form, which is really powerful. So Tyranitar still going strong. They cannot bring him down. Will he ever fall down to a lower tier? No, of course not. That would be ridiculous. That could never happen to somebody like Tyranitar. Shuckle has Sticky Web now, making it a bit better. That's something. I hope everyone can show some appreciation for Shuckle down below for being a little bit better than he was before with the new option, because that's fun. Aerodactyl can be Mega 2 now, and he gets much higher attack and speed. 438 speed, I mean, gee whiz, that's powerful. Not OU ranked though, lacks a good flying stab option. A bit punished by such fellows as Landorus Therian, bit of a waste of the Mega Stone, weak to rock and all that, a bit frail. But I think you do occasionally see it still, as like a fast cleaner on perhaps a very aggressive team style, so that's something. Maybe bringing back the old Aerodactyl way of just being a straight up physical attacker rather than a hazard setting lead. Aurorus was an attempt to design a new rock type. It's rock and ice. It's a new hail setter, which is something, and it also has Refrigerate, which turns normal type moves into ice type moves and grants them more power, which is an amazing offensive ability. However, Rock Ice is just absolutely horrible defensive typing. You're going to combine two of the worst defensive types into one. Your weaknesses are through the roof. The types don't complement each other whatsoever. They, in fact, bring out the worst in one another. It's a terrible synergy. You're ×4 weak to steel, ×4 weak to fighting, weak to rock, weak to ground, weak to grass, weak to fire. You're not weak to fire, actually. Never mind. The synergy is insane. You're neutral to fire. This is unbelievable. Yeah, Aurorus has a tough experience. It does. And Tyrantrum is yet another... It's Rock Dragon, the first one we've ever seen. That's pretty fun. And it's not a bad complementary typing because neutral to water and grass, unlike many other fellows. It also has Dragon Dance, meaning it can do something like this, boost up its low speed, but I think even after a Dragon Dance boost, this guy isn't fast enough to pose too much of a threat. Fairy types now exist, making it dangerous to lock into Dragon type attacks. That was a bit of a nerf to Dragon types across the board, and Tyrantrum suffers from that quite a bit. And of course, you have very low special defense stat, as is tradition for rock types. So Tyrantrum is quite a bit better than Aurorus, its counterpart though, with an RUBL rating. I think it's fairly usable in the UU tier, perhaps. And it gets some pretty good abilities, Rock Head for cutting the head smash recoil, which is actually quite good, and Strong Jaw if you want to increase your bite-based attacks. That's probably way worse than Rock Head, but if you're interested, you can do that if you like. In Gen 7, I'm sure it's no surprise that Mega Diancie and Tyranitar are still viable in much the same way they were in Gen 6, but as for new rock types in this generation, we have Nihilego. How are you supposed to pronounce this guy? Nihilego? It's quite a name. This is probably my favorite of the Ultra Beasts. I really like it. I think it's very unique. It is UU ranked, but that's okay. It's hard to be viable in Gen 7. It's a tough world, very high power level. But it's Rock Poison, which is a very unique typing for a special attacker. You don't commonly see rock type special attackers in general, and this is kind of an opposite of how rock types usually are seen, because it's specially leaning offensively and defensively, and has the utility of toxic spikes. You can do, this is a cool set with Electrium Z and Thunder for a big nuke that activates Beast Boost for you. Definitely overshadowed by the other Ultra Beasts such as Kartana and Blacephalon and such fellows as that, but I really like Nihiligo, even though I don't know how to pronounce his name. And visual design is also awesome. It's like a weird jellyfish guy. I really like the way this looks and the uniqueness of it. Stakataka is another one of the cooler Ultra Beasts. It's like a big brick wall. Not very good in singles though. Rock Steel famously has its issues, although this guy is one of the better ones at making up for those issues. It's not quite as bad as others. It's RUBL. Considering the typing, I could think that that's impressive. Trick Room setter. Trick Room not great in singles, of course. And has 13 speed, which is funny. This guy was like designed to be a Trick Room setter with its horrendous speed stat, but access to Stab Gyro Ball, which is more powerful the slower you are. So they definitely thought this one through. They designed it to do this specific thing. And in doubles, this guy was excellent, actually. I don't know about excellent, but it was quite good. The one time I did play VGC, I used this guy on my team as a Xerneas check, because this fella resists Fairy and can Trick Room and then hit Xerneas with a big Gyro Ball and KO it and get Beast Boost. So I thought that was fun. I enjoyed using Stakataka in VGC. I don't know about the name though, Stakataka. I suppose it's fun to say. It's not terrible. In Gen 8, there's an absolute rock type drought. The only OU ranked rock type is Tyranitar. I'm happy for Tyranitar beating the allegations. He fell to UU for a bit in Gen 8, but rose back up. Lost his most important option, Pursuit. Suffering a bit from mechanical changes. Over the years, that they have tried to keep him down by removing permanent weather from the game and other such changes, but Tyranitar remains powerful. It's a good check to Dragapult that outputs a lot of damage, turns defense into offense. It's a bit sad to see like no other rock types. Terrakion is still here, but it's UUBL. I'm not sure how good it is. The most noteworthy new rock type they designed was Stonjourner. This is the best they could do. Power Spot gives extra damage to allies in doubles, alright. Suppose that makes it a bit unique, but folks can't help but notice this is yet another... This is like a parody of the rock type. They gave it 20 special defense and 20 special attack. This is just Gigalith, but he looks like Stonehenge. I think that it has 70 speed. I mean, that's, by rock type standards, this is a speedster. Did anyone ever use this in doubles? Was Power Spot good enough in doubles? I'm doubtful. Maybe with Trick Room this guy's okay, and Power Spot goes insane. Who knows? I think probably not though, would be my guess. Yeah, not much to say about Gen 8 in the realm of rock types. In Gen 9, however, we have quite a few noteworthy new rock types, and probably the most significant of all is Garganical, the most impactful rock type in quite a while. Garganical has defeated the allegations and can function as a powerful wall, which is something that many rock types struggle to do. Garganical has a fantastic defensive move pool with immediate healing in the form of Recover, Stealth Rock, the signature move Salt Cure, which is an attack that applies a damage over time effect that punishes Steel and Water types massively, dealing 1/4 of their health every turn. Very strong move that's hard to switch in against. And the icing on the cake is that Garganical gets Purifying Salt, one of the best abilities in the entire franchise. This grants a complete immunity to status ailments, even from the secondary effects of moves like Skull, and also a ghost resistance as well. You take half damage from ghost attacks. Garganical was a point of serious debate early on. People wanted this guy banned straight up. This was running amok, defeating everybody, but the metagame has adapted around it, even dropped down to UU for a time. It's risen back up to its proper place, as I predicted it would, and now it's kind of just a part of the tier. I think it is, now that I'm more used to it, it's kind of a unique Pokemon. It was difficult to understand how to play against it early on, because we've never seen a Pokemon like this that's just a wall that is immune to so many of the common anti-wall technologies, such as, you know, status ailments, and it randomly resists Ghost, which catches you off guard, and Salt Cure just punishes every switch in. But, you know, we've kind of realized that Covert Cloak is a good counter, and like sub setup sweepers can really punish the guy. and even something like a Slowking Galar Future Sight. You can also force it to Terra, which removes their resource, and while it turns Garganical into a really strong thing, it's still passive and punishable, and you can play around it, but yeah, of course, it's still, despite all those ways to play around it, it's still a central Pokemon in Gen 9 and one of the best, probably the best defensive rock type ever done. This is the first time a defensive rock type has actually functioned as a good wall. Terra certainly helps, like the ability to Terra and become a better defensive type like Water and Fairy is significant, but even when it doesn't Terra, the guy is quite good defensively and functions very well. Glimmora is another very significant new rock type that has been consistently popular throughout the entirety of Gen 9 so far, and it is primarily used as a special attacking lead, taking after Nihilego, who came before it, with a rock poison typing and especially leaning stat distribution with 130 base special attack, which is quite enormous. It also has the ability Toxic Debris, which when hit by a physical attack, you make a layer of toxic spikes. Really, really good ability. Setting hazards by just sitting there taking an attack. That is significant. Glimmora also gets Mortal Spin, which is a totally new form of hazard removal. Poison type Rapid Spin, basically, that also applies poison to the enemy at the same time. Really nice option. I've also started seeing people do Power Herb, Meteor Beam, Glimmora. Power Herb makes you able to use a 2-turn move in 1 turn, like for example Solar Beam or something like that, but with Meteor Beam, it deals this huge rock type special attack and raises your special attack by 1, which is kind of a cool way to turn Glimmora into a proactive threat instead of just a hazard setter. I've seen this set quite a bit more recently. So Glimmora is not just a hazard setter. You can also go Choice Scarf Glimmora and go in a more offensive direction. It has a solid enough base speed to be quite fast with a Choice Scarf, really good special attack stat, so this can be like a late game cleaner or just a powerful threat to take advantage of. Glimmora is the first successful special attacking rock type ever, I think. Unless you count Mega Diancie, but Mega Diancie was more of a mixed attacker. This is a primarily special attacker that is actually very good and functions very well in OU. The new Pokemon Ogerpon has many different forms, depending on which mask it's wearing, and one of the lesser used Ogerpon forms is the Cornerstone Rock-type form. Not as popular as the Wellspring form, which is a staple of OU at this point, but Ogerpon Cornerstone crucially has the ability Sturdy, and is probably the most effective Ogerpon form as a hazard setting lead. If you would like to use Ogerpon for such a purpose, it has spikes. It doesn't have Stealth Rock, but it does have spikes, which feel a bit better as a hazard in Gen 9 with the addition of heavy duty boots and all that. Spikes are more likely to pressure what you need to, because most Rock Weak Pokemon are just running boots anyway. And Goldengo now exists to more reliably block Defog and Rapid Spin and even Mortal Spin, so spikes stacking feels really good in this gen. You do have quite a bit of competition though, like Meowscarada is another fast hazard setter with spikes. You have like Samurott Hisui, who can attack and create spikes at the same time with Ceaseless Edge, but Ogerpon Cornerstone has its benefits. You have a very powerful rock type attack in the form of Ivy Cudgel, which becomes rock type when you have the Cornerstone mask on. 100-100, which is really good, and high crit rate on top of that. Hard to come by a reliable rock move like that. And Power Whip. Grass Rock is a pretty nice offensive profile. You threaten a lot of stuff, and you notably outrun and threaten Hisui and Samurott with significant damage. Not a very commonly seen Pokemon, especially because it means you can't run Ogerpon Wellspring if you're running this, but I could see a use for this fellow, and it has a couple unique traits compared to other similar hazard setters in the format. Another noteworthy new rock type in Gen 9 is Arcanine Hisui, who is UU ranked, isn't the greatest Pokemon of all time either, but I believe there have been some teams that have hit pretty good ladder ratings with this Pokemon actually. It has the combination of Lair Blitz and Head Smash, but also Rock Head to completely immunize you to that recoil damage. These moves have massive base power, Stab from Fire Rock, really good offensive type profile, and extreme speed for valuable priority. Actually a pretty nice wall breaker. Arcanine Hisui. 115 attack by Gen 9's standards isn't that high, but still, you can do something with this maybe. It's tough in a world of Great Tusk and all that, but I think if you really wanted to build around Hisui and Arcanine, you probably could, and it takes good advantage of its rock typing. Iron Boulder also exists, and this was quite a popular new rock type that came out recently in the DLC 2. update. It's a future form of Terrakion with a rock psychic typing and really high speed, and access to booster energy made it a pretty nice late game cleaner. Also gets the new move Mighty Cleave, which can bypass protection and has a pretty high power and accuracy for a rock type attack. Solid coverage too. It's ranked in UUBL now. Its popularity has dwindled over time. It's a bit harder to justify using this compared to other offensive threats such as Iron Valiant and Roaring Moon and such fellows as that. And Landorus Therian has been rising in popularity quite a bit recently, which has been poor news for Iron Boulder, who can't really threaten Landorus Therian very well, gets pretty shut down by it. But still, good Pokemon. I will say though, one of the worst Pokemon names of all time, Iron Boulder. I don't think I could come up with a lamer name than this if I actively tried to. And finally we have Kleavor, who is a Pokemon that I thought would be significantly better than it actually ended up being. That's my mistake, folks. Kleavor has the signature move Stone Axe, which sounds like the best move ever made. It sets Stealth Rock on the field while attacking, and it's boosted by Sharpness. You got a lot of really solid ways to take advantage of Sharpness, which buffs slicing-based moves on this Pokemon. It sounded really good to me, like as an aggressive opener, but in practice is a bit weak, easy to stop, has little mid-game value, suffers from its rock weakness, and Stealth Rock just doesn't feel as powerful as Spikes do, so Samurott Hisui has it beat. It feels more threatening, feels a bit better, typing-wise, does more in most games, and you can also spam Ceaseless Edge and stack multiple Spikes, whereas Stone Axe is only really useful once. You're better off running Stealth Rock on something like Gliscor, who is more overall useful, even though you're not attacking and setting Stealth Rock at the same time. It's not as much of a benefit as it sounds like, with all the downsides of the Pokemon itself. Still an interesting concept, a fairly unique Pokemon design that I appreciate a little bit. And of course we have to close out the Rock-type video with Tyranitar, the most iconic Rock-type of all time. Perhaps the most legendary competitive Pokemon in history, with an illustrious career, ranked OU back-to-back for how many generations, never falling off until now, of course, where in Generation 9 Tyranitar has finally fallen from its OU spot. It is UU ranked as we speak, which is a little bit of a tragedy. Tyranitar can't quite keep up these days. Great Tusk being brought into existence was not helpful. It's a ground fighting type, that's Tyranitar's worst nightmare, and it's on every team ever. There has been no real reason to use Tyranitar for most of Gen 9. It didn't even get knockoff before, and there was no good Sand Rush Pokemon to benefit from Sandstorm. The chip damage from Sand is not really as valuable in a world where that is not permanent any longer. No Pursuit to provide that utility. So what does Tyranitar even do? It doesn't provide any weather synergy, doesn't do anything. Not really any good as a Dragon Dance threat in a generation with like Roaring Moon and Dragonite and those kinds of people to contend with. So Tyranitar's been having a rough experience, but I think recently Tyranitar is actually feeling kinda good in OU again, and I think it has a chance to rise back up, maybe, over time, as things settle a bit. I think Tyranitar could possibly return to its former glory. Getting knockoff was a big deal. Tyranitar feels like a natural knockoff user, because everything it forces in hates losing its item. That's something you can build around. Sand is good again because Excadrill's back. Excadrill wasn't in the original Gen 9 release, now Excadrill's here, and that's a good Pokemon. It hits like Iron Valiant, it's got a good type profile, it's a spinner. Excadrill feels good in Gen 9 too, and I've actually been playing with a Tyranitar team in Gen 9 OU recently. Tyranitar, Excadrill, Zamazenta balanced team, and I'm enjoying it, and I think Tyranitar feels quite nice. Sand comes in handy, to be honest. Spreading knockoff is good for a balancy mid-range team, and you can snipe Gliscor with Ice Beam. Low Kick is useful. You can hit heavy fellows, and King Gambit maybe. Terra Flying can get you surprise KOs. I actually really like using Tyranitar right now in Gen 9 OU's metagame. Will it be popular enough to rise back up to OU? I'm not sure, but I actually think it feels pretty good in the current metagame. It's not completely useless anymore, with more reason to actually run it in a team, like it getting knockoff and Excadrill return. And that does it for my showcase of the Rock type throughout the generations. Overall, I think Rock is one of my personal favorite types in the game, and a lot of the most interesting Pokemon ever made have been Rock types, because I think it lends itself to some interesting design, you know? It has a lot of flaws inherently, with its 5 weaknesses, most of them to really bad types to be weak to, but it has advantages too. Offensively, it's outstanding. Throughout the years, they gave it more value, like Sandstorm immunity and the buff it gets in Sand to special defense were cool. For a Rock type to be successful, it has to be designed in an interesting way to combat its flaws in some way. Like, I don't know, Lunatone back in Gen 3 who has Levitate to make up for its ground weakness, or Terrakion back in Gen 5 who is offensively oriented. Garganical in Gen 9, as annoying as the guy is designed to overcome the flaws of the rock type a little bit, and the drawbacks of the rock type keep it balanced as well. Every rock type is going to have those flaws that you can exploit, making them feel fair to play against, in my opinion. Even as good as they are, there's always ways to punish them. Thank you for watching, folks. Who's your favorite rock type? Mine is, of course, Tyranitar. You gotta respect the greatest of all time. But what about you? Let me know down below, and thank you for watching.